Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the draft guidelines workshop for the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, TIRCP, Cycle 7. This one's for Northern California agencies. We'll be doing another one later today for Southern California. I am Marty Greenstein. I am the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Communications at CalSTA. I'm joined by Chad Edison, our Chief Deputy Secretary for Rail and Transit, and also Anthony Cerna, who's on the team here at CalSTA as well. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded, so you'll be able to reference it later if you need to. There is going to be a presentation, and following the presentation, we will be doing a Q&A session. And the way we're going to be doing that is using the Q&A feature in WebEx, which you can find by going to the bottom right corner of your screen, and there will be 3 dots there. And if you click on that 3 dots, you should be able to pull up the Q&A section and be able to type your questions in there as we go. But we likely won't be getting to them until the presentation is over. So if we're not answering your questions right away, just know we do see them and we will get to them. Also, there will be an opportunity to provide comments after this is over via email, and that email will be provided at the end of the presentation. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Chad now.
Thank you, Marty, and welcome everybody to our TIRCP Cycle 7 Draft Guidelines Workshop. I'm going to cover a few things here today and then leave plenty of time for questions. First, a little bit of background on the program. So on the next slide, we've got the agenda. First, some background on the program, a conversation around funding, the key considerations of the program, our timeline for final guidelines and awards, and take questions and feedback. So first of all, many on this webinar are familiar with the program, but for those that are not as familiar, our funding for this cycle and in general for the program has come from transportation improvement fee revenues provided under SB1 and a continuous appropriation of 10% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund cap and trade proceeds. Since 2015, over $10 billion in funding has been awarded to 132 projects throughout the state. And our program has a focus on priority populations. Projects in nearly all of them are expected to contribute direct, meaningful, and assured benefits to disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households. It is rare that we have projects that can't demonstrate that. And our program focuses on ensuring geographic equity. Some examples of projects drawn from the Northern California end of things include investments in transit and rail infrastructure. These include some of the improvements to the Capital Corridor designed to increase ridership, the East Ridge to BART Regional Connector Project, and the Valley Link Rail, which received project development funding in the prior round of Cycle 6. And then we have zero emission and other bus projects of the transit services and some of the transit-oriented development efforts up in Humboldt Bay area received funding the last time around, growing their zero emission fleet. And then also projects to support service expansion in Truckee and Santa Cruz. Those are examples of projects that we have funded in the recent past. Go on to the next slide, please. Overall, our statutory requirements for the program are that we do a 5-year program to fund a small number of transformative projects that improve the statewide network and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our primary evaluation criteria are in 4 categories. Projects have to both reduce GHG emissions and increase ridership. They also are evaluated on their achievement of integrated services and the safety benefits that the projects realize. We have secondary evaluation criteria as well that are focused on a lot of the co-benefits. And that includes addressing sustainable community goals that have been adopted by each region, disadvantaged community benefits, geographic balance, network integration, housing and job considerations, and other factors that can be seen in the guidelines. In terms of the in terms of cycle 7 guidelines, this is largely similar to cycle 5, which was our last round that was the traditional program. We had a special general fund based round in cycle 6 that had additional categories of project eligibility. Those additional categories are not in this cycle because this is our regular program of continuous appropriations. The SB 125 transit program is referenced in the guidelines, and in the funding from SB 125 that has been programmed regionally can be used as match for these competitive applications to TRCP. They will be considered a local match for the purposes of project evaluation. And so if you have funding that is pledged, that can either be through actually beginning to spend it on a project that you're applying for here in the early phases, or it can be through promising to apply that match should you receive this funding. Those are both eligible ways to use SB 125 funding. For cycle 7, the fund estimate, you can assume that there will be at least $900 million available for award in cycle 7. That number is subject to change based on upcoming cap and trade auction results that will be realized during the period of application submission and review. And so we will potentially have a different number than this, but you can assume that at least $900 million will be available. If you have a project that has intercity rail benefits, you need to discuss the reference of that, the relationship of that project to the corridor ID program. Almost all of the corridors in the state that have current or proposed intercity rail in the future are accepted into the FRA's corridor ID program, either through programs that are being developed with the facilitation of Caltrans or through other agencies, depending on the corridor. We can provide more information on that, but I think if you're proposing projects that involve intercity rail or benefit intercity rail, you should already be fairly aware of how they interact with that process. Glad to take any questions on that if we need to, either in this webinar or later through email communication. On the next slide, we have another category here of anti-displacement considerations. This has been part of our guidelines previously. We are proposing some additional language here that would be added on page 19 to the draft guidelines. When looking at housing strategies, applicants are encouraged to include narrative demonstrating an understanding of displacement vulnerabilities. As you can read here, proximate to the project area and demonstrate how direct and indirect displacement is considered and minimized by the proposed project, if applicable. And then key to this, anti-displacement efforts that are part of implementing a capital project are eligible costs under TRCP. So you can call that out and use some of the funding to fund those activities. Next slide. In terms of key considerations for applicants, we focus on priority populations. So you should do careful work on showing the direct, meaningful, and assured benefits to disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households of your projects. And when we talk about geographic equity, we consider this within funding cycles. But we also consider that underrepresentation in past funding cycles may also be considered. So we look at it both within the current cycle to try to get geographic balance in our awards, and also consider whether the region has previously received significant funding or not. One key element here is that different parts of the state are not evaluated against the other regions in the same way, meaning that a Central Valley project or a North State project doesn't have the same, doesn't compete directly against the Bay Area projects for the same dollar per ton calculations and other aspects of the program. Projects are looked at within their regions in a manner that allows us to pick the best projects within each region, and we're not required to compare all the projects statewide and then, put all the money in the region that has all the good projects, if that were the case. So the highest rated projects are relative within each region of the state. And overall, requirements for geographic equity statewide may limit the amount of funding within a region. That can make some regions more competitive than others for receiving a portion of the funding. Next slide. Clean technology continues to be a focus of the program. It's the main way in which GHG reductions can be realized in expanding service. So one thing I will point out here is that if you are investing in replacing aging vehicle fleets or making facility and network improvement projects, you can qualify many of these projects through combining them with other efforts. So if you are replacing vehicles in your fleet and then you're proposing to operate them on a network that has transit priority being invested in, that can sometimes allow you to have additional service possible because the buses are operating faster over a given route. So that transit priority can be a tool to make an existing number of buses that are being replaced operate faster on selected corridors in your region, thus allowing you to run more service with the same number of buses and increase your ridership through faster trips and more efficiency in your operation. The same thing can be said for making it easier to pay for your transit. Contactless payment is a key tool in increasing ridership, and whether through the California Integrated Travel Program or other activities that deploy contactless payment, we have guidance on how to quantify that in our guidelines, similar to past rounds. And then integration efforts with other corridors and operators and service restructuring can often be a key tool to increasing network ridership, even without major service frequency additions. And so the efforts that make that possible can be combined with the other capital items that are discussed at the top of this page. Let's go on to the next slide. In terms of housing and job considerations, transit supportive land use decisions are key to increasing ridership and showing that we can expect the ridership benefits of the project to be realized. So if you have entitled housing projects within a half a mile of transit stations, they're expected to be delivered within the required project outcome reporting period. You can use that as support for greater strength in your ridership growth, either at the beginning when the project first gets turned on, or over the coming years as those projects get completed along the corridor and support more robust ridership growth. Also, for projects that link housing with key destinations and improve accessibility to economic opportunities, you can document how ridership growth is supported by housing policies that support such growth. Documenting the community benefits for projects is very important to the analysis. And so when you're submitting your applications, please do your best to describe any expected housing and job related benefits from your projects. Finally, as in all cycles before, reporting on job co-benefits is one of the requirements. That co-benefit modeling tool is developed by CARB, and their tools will be updated by the time we publish our final guidelines. Also, annual reporting is expected for at least for 36 months after projects become operational for most projects. There are some exceptions to that tied to agencies that have programs of projects that are delivered over multiple completion dates. On to the next slide. Our timeline for the program is to do the 2 workshops today. We're aiming to have our guidelines adopted and have a call for projects on April 23rd. We then have what has been a very valuable part of our process for many agencies, the optional virtual consultation meetings. These will be scheduled in a 10-11 day period in May. For those who are interested in getting one of those on the calendar, please submit an email to the TIRCP comments inbox. That's the same one you'll use to comment on the guidelines here if you have feedback that you would like to provide. And we will try to get those scheduled. They generally are 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the complexity of the issues that you want to discuss. And we do request a preview of what the topics are in advance of those meetings. Applications are expected to be due on July 23rd, and we're aiming to have our award announcement in the fall on or about October 23rd. With that, this is the formal part of the presentation. We're asking for any comments that you have beyond those which you make here in the workshop, submitted to us by email at trcpcomments@dot.ca.gov by April 18th. And then if you also want to, if there are further questions that come up, not ones related to the guidelines, but that come up as you are interacting with the application materials, or if you just want to join the mailing list for TRCP, please also submit a request to the same inbox. So with that, I will go ahead, we'll take the presentation down here and we'll go to questions and answers. I see an initial question here, and then Marty will be monitoring this as I do the answers. How will an increase in ridership be evaluated if it's a new service? New services have a few different approaches to being able to do this. In many cases, if it's, I don't have the exact context of the agency that's asking this question, but in general, if you have something that is FTA supported, the same tools you use to develop the FTA ridership results are the ones that you will be relying on to provide input to the GHG calculator tools and other aspects of the application here. In general, we're looking for you to have a reasonable ridership estimate. We're not looking for you to predict, 10% ridership growth if you don't have policies and other investments in the region that would support that. In general, we're looking for you to at least tie your ridership growth to the demographic growth happening in your region, and then justify why it might happen faster than that if you have good reason to believe that your project will grow faster. But again, if your region is declining in population and you're coming in and saying we're going to grow 5% year on year for the next 50 years, that is going to be a hard thing to prove out, and we will follow up and ask you to provide either detailed justification on that or otherwise not count those numbers as a valid forecast. So we really need to have a reasonable forecast here that is tied to the kind of ridership efforts that you would make. There are some kind of key assumptions for systems that are just investing in routes that are similar to the rest of their transit system. You can use data from the National Transit Database to support your average trip distance. You can look at ridership on similar routes with similar levels of service and use that as a foundation. So there's a number of ways to address ridership, but again, if you're doing something that involves FTA also reviewing your ridership, we expect you to use the same information in providing the detail in your applications. Let's go on to other questions.
One more question, and as Chad looks at that, just a reminder, it is kind of hard to find the Q&A portion for this on WebEx sometimes. It doesn't come up automatically. You have to find it in the bottom right corner. There's like 3 dots that you have to click on first. So if you're having trouble finding the Q&A, that's where you can find it.
So it looks like there is a question in the inbox from Paul Hernandez at Volterra saying we provide charging infrastructure as a service and design, build, operate, maintain EV chargers for our customers. We're a private company. The draft guidelines specifically note investments from the private sector. Can you elaborate on what CalSTA expects or anticipates as investments from the private sector? The eligible applicants to our program are public agencies. We have often seen private companies or private, we have seen some projects feature private investments as part of the project, and we encourage those partnerships. To the extent that there is investment from private sources in a project that can be considered match to the overall program, And so as you put in your applications, I'm identifying where those investments are and how those partnerships are being provided. This could help get your funding need from TRCP to a lower number, which would make your project more competitive. And so there are many different ways to document that, but private companies cannot be the actual applicants to the program. They can be implementation partners, they can be investors, they can provide funding, and they can help enhance the overall results of the project that is submitted. Hope that addresses the question. I see another question here from Lillian Tsang. Is there any minimum matching requirements, maximum amount of grant funding per applicant? Two things to guide that question, the answer to that question. There's not a minimum match, although higher levels of match do two things. We do look at matching funds as one of our evaluation criteria, and the percentage of matching funds is part of that calculation. We also note that matching funds reduce the amount of funding from TRCP that you're requiring, and one of our evaluation criteria is what the investment of TRCP funding is per greenhouse gas, per ton of greenhouse gas emissions reduced. In terms of maximum amount of grant funding per applicant, that is not a consistent, there is no specific maximum, but there is a geographic balance requirement in our program. So if we have $900 million to invest, and you're in a part of the state with a very small share of the population of the state, you should not expect to get a $300 million investment. Likewise, if you're in the Bay Area and you have a project that needs 70% of the funding in our program, you should not expect that either, given the need for geographic balance around the state. So we have projects that are in the low single-digit millions in some cases, and in other cases, we funded projects that have an excess of $100 million or so of funding in a cycle like this. And so it really depends on where you are in the state and how that project scales. We've had, in our last cycle 5, we had projects within the 800 million in the northern regions of the state up in Humboldt Bay that got over $30 million. And then we had projects in the Bay Area that were, that were microtransit projects in local communities that got $3 or $4 or $5 million over a short time period to provide 5 years of microtransit service, along with the fleet necessary to deliver that service. And so it really depends on where you are and how that looks in terms of geographic balance. Again, it's rare that we would get dramatically higher amounts in a region of the state that has a lower population. Unlikely we would get $100 million into a place with 1% of the state's population, for example.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions here in the chat. Here, how will increase in ridership be evaluated if we are applying for the construction of a facility?
Okay, so a facility on its own does not deliver an increase in ridership unless it's tied to other investments that facility makes, an increase in service that the facility is actually making possible. So if the construction of the facility allows you to run more service, you usually would come in and also ask for the buses to run that service in that same program of projects. I think this is one of the things that I should emphasize about our program. Often there's a packaging of multiple capital projects for a given agency that delivers the expected results of our program. And so if you are starting with a key project that needs funding, you may need to look at other aspects of your capital program for other related investments that you can tie together to deliver the increase in ridership and reduction in GHG emissions. We may not just only fund a facility that needs investment to be modernized. We may also need to fund the transit priority lanes on which those vehicles are going to operate, or the bus purchase that's going to make expanded service possible. You need to do the demonstration that your combination of project program components deliver a project that both reduces greenhouse gas emissions and increases ridership.
Got another question here, requesting clarification on matching funds. So in the guidelines, it states consideration will be given to those sources that are discretionary, including competitive and non-competitive, compared to those that are non-discretionary. Can you elaborate more on this?
Right. One of the aspects of putting together a full funding package is to demonstrate which other sources you're planning to use in your matching funds. To the extent that some of those discretionary sources are being used and are already available to you versus those that are still subject to future approval, that is an important element of us understanding the stability of your financial proposal. Because if the funding has not yet been awarded through another program, it's harder to count that as fully available unless you show us a backfill mechanism through other sources. Those sources that are non-discretionary, those that are based on your formula funding or available to you as a backstop for another source that you're hoping to get, we just need to understand what you are proposing in your financial plan. And so being clear where the decision is in terms of receiving money and how solid the commitment is, or how you plan to backstop a funding source that isn't yet awarded to you. That is all a part of our consideration.
Have another question here on ridership assumptions. Can a pre-COVID model run from 2019 still be used? 2019 still be used? If not, can it be updated off model with clear assumption notes, or does a new model run for 2023 need to be used?
So we do not have a particular strong opinion on which model you use and how you get to a reasonable assumption. Many agencies may still have their best information in a pre-COVID model that they would update. In most cases, you're talking about construction completion that might be 4 or 5 or even more years into the future from now. And so, a reasonable assumption of what you will deliver in terms of ridership 4 or 5 years from now doesn't need to start with assuming that what you have today or last year is your kind of baseline for that future year, or that it's only going to grow marginally from here to there if you believe that you are doing other things on your system that will lead to recovering service to something close to pre-pandemic levels. So I think there are 2 parts to any ridership information used in the GHG calculator tools for this program. One is the first year when you open your project for service, and the other is the final year of project benefits. In cases of fixed guideway investments, in many cases, you will have a project that has 50 years of benefits. And so you're being asked to not just forecast how many people will use it in the first year, but how many people will use that 50 years later. And that is often tied to a fairly simple information that's extrapolated from what's already in your regional tools, or something tied to demographic growth that's expected. Other projects will have a shorter time period. Ones that involve just bus purchases usually use the useful life of the bus as the period of benefit. So you will have 12 years of benefits for the typical bus only purchased project. So that is all. And again, that has one number for the first year, one number for the final year. And those numbers are averaged in the tool to deliver the total amount of benefits over that useful life of the project. Hope that provides clarity, but we can also address some of these in the technical consultations later if desired.
So I answered a question in the chat regarding KML, KMZ files for on-demand service. So I think we are kind of at the end of the list of questions here. So maybe we can give people a few minutes here to type anything else in. See one coming in here from Laurel. We're looking at implementing a transit connector that would give express buses easier access from toll lanes to a transit center. One direction will be a bus-only lane, but the other will likely need to allow for HOV 3+ based on stakeholder feedback. Would this TDM type component be eligible?
Yeah, and from what I'm understanding here on this question, Laurel, these are investments that will make the bus services faster and perhaps allow additional bus services to be operated. All of that can be explained as investments that increase ridership. So our key thing here is to tie the impact of the capital project to something that both increases ridership, thus, that already reduces GHG emissions. And then to the extent that the buses consume less energy, that can also be a factor in getting benefit. You certainly can have an investment that is express bus only in one direction, a direct access ramp, and then gets there through TDM, operational technology investments. On the other side, those can both be funded if there are capital investments required for either of those types of projects. Hope that answers the question.
And seeing no more questions in the Q&A, we will give it about 1 more minute, and then we can wrap up this workshop. You can still send in your questions via email, tircpcomments@dot.ca.gov. And again, this webinar will be is recorded and will be posted to the CalSTA website in the next day or two, so you could reference that as well if needed. And seeing no more questions in the Q&A, we will end this workshop. Thank you all for attending, and have a good day. Thank you.